Welcome to this latest episode of Two Heads Are Better Than One with me, Rod Grant.
And me, Cameron Wiley.
And Cameron, this week, we're inundated with emails and
I know, it's extraordinary.
It's really
really.
extraordinary.
We do need some commentary from people out there. If you're listening.
Yeah.
So if you like this one or you don't like this one, comment on it anyway.
Yeah.
What we're going to do today is that Rod and I are going to have a conversation about whether or not independent schools are worth it. Now, you might think at the outset that Rod and I are not entirely unbiased, since I ended my career as principal of George Heriot School and Rod ended his career as headmaster. Is that
Headmaster?
Headmaster. He was a headmaster of
Hall
School.
I was given the option, Cameron. They said, well, you're the new head. What do you want to be called? Do you want head teacher? Would you like principal? Do you like rector? And I said, I want headmaster.
Yes, yeah, principal, there's a long history about why I was the principal and not the headmaster, but we won't go into that just at this moment. So anyway, you might think that we're a wee bit unbiased, and what we're going to do today is, in fact, we're going to try and, we're going to be biased, and we're going to kind of sell you private education, okay? Yeah. And in a number of weeks to be determined, we're hoping we'll have a special guest, and that special guest will be somebody from who has a different viewpoint about private education.
Is there anyone out there?
Yeah, well, there's quite a lot of people out there, I think. So, Rod,
yes.
Let's imagine that you are a young man. Let's just make that leap.
Okay.
And let's imagine that you're a young man and you've got a child, and that child is 5 years old, and you and your lady are determining whether or not that child should go into a private school. So from your experience, what would you say is the biggest, strongest argument for placing a child into private education in Scotland in 2026?
One word: discipline. And that's not because I'm some kind of, a right-wing foaming at the mouth. Everybody deserves to be punished for when they do things wrong. It's not about that. It's about, I think, creating an environment that feels safe and where children feel valued and supported. And not so much so that, the scuffle in the playground, you've got adults suddenly and, going all guns blazing and mediating and trying to say, you mustn't bully other children. Not that. I think sometimes we can go a bit too far when it comes to that, because we need, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. We need that in order to, I think, become more rounded and resilient people in a world that is not always terribly forgiving. So, but anyway, yes, to answer your initial question, thinking back, also, I suppose my experience is slightly different from most because I've worked in local authority schools as well as independent schools, and I've parented children through a local authority school, and also parented a child through two children through independent school. So I've got a broad base of, I think, understanding of the two sectors. But for me, the number one priority would be that sense of a wee 5-year-old going into class and feeling safe, and therefore discipline is probably my number one.
Yeah, that was my number one too. I should say that Rod and I decided we'd have blind lists of things we thought were good. I think I was a bit influenced. I mean, I've just written a piece. I was in the Scotsman on Saturday writing about the mobile phone ban.
Yeah.
And when I began to think about the mobile phone ban, it struck me as a very odd thing altogether, because obviously it's a big step for the Scottish government to decide that mobile phones should be banned in schools, and therefore they're going to ban them, and they're going to ban them by making secondary school children put their phones into wee magnetic locked things. And I sort of had this flash where I kind of thought, why can't they tell them just to switch them off? Why can't that happen? And I put that to 2 or 3 of my colleagues in various different kinds of school. And I'll be interested to see what happens in the independent sector, because I don't think the independent sector will ban them in that sense, disable them, as it were. But people in the state sector just thought, well, you can do that. How would you enforce that? Well, of course, the answer is you enforce it with sanctions. You enforce it with what we used to call discipline, what we used to call punishment. None of that seems to be kind of acceptable anymore. And my problem with it is that it causes the young people to lack autonomy. It means that they can't decide for themselves, that if the teacher says, look, could you switch your phone off, they should switch their phone off. They're just made to do it effectively. It doesn't matter how you feel about not being able to use your mobile phone. You're not going to be able to use it because it's going to be in this little kind of thing. £400,000 City of Edinburgh are spending on the wee things to put your phone in.
Well, that's genius. That's brilliant.
And it's sort of, and you're kind of thinking, I wonder if they tried a system whereby, they just said, switch your phones off. If you look at your phones, X will happen, i.e., very probably we will confiscate your phone. And I can kind of feel the collective shudder of a lot of colleagues in the state sector saying, yeah, but parents would complain and, is that legal, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need to have rules and regulations in schools. We need children to absolutely adhere to them. And the truth of the matter is that now happens in private schools in a way that not absolutely across the piece, but certainly it is not happening in some state schools for what one can only describe as misguided educational reasons.
And it's the major factor in me moving from working in a local authority school into the independent sector was because I wanted autonomy. I wanted to be able to do things my way. And then you try to create an environment that in some way mirrors, your own beliefs. I mean, also, this is going to sound a bit strange, but I kind of want kids to, try it on a bit, misbehave a wee bit, and then bring them in and say, well, that's okay. You're having a bit of fun. It went a bit wrong. Let's think about what the consequences might have been, had it gone even more wrong.
Yeah.
And
one doesn't want children to be zombies.
No.
Because they're so afraid of discipline.
No.
I grew up in a household where there was a fair edge of discipline. And I think there were points where I was afraid. But at the end of the day, I never really felt afraid in the school.
No.
But I was well aware of the fact that there would be consequences if I did things that were not allowed.
Yeah, as a pupil in a local authority school, early on in my educational journey, I wasn't frightened of the adults who had the ability to belt you or hit you over the hand with a ruler. I was frightened of their kids, particularly the older ones, and that was even then.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that fear was warranted. It was just the fact that you were suddenly propelled into this world where you were dealing with older children.
And the other thing, though, having just mentioned family, I think one of the things about it is that there is certainly a difference in the way that parents bring up their children. Now, I think what I personally think is that across the piece, that those differences are probably good things, but there is a problem there's definitely a problem with some households when it comes to discipline.
Yeah.
And I think that what's happened therefore is that the disciplinary journey for a child used to be split between home and school.
Yeah.
I mean, when I got into trouble at school, I was much, 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 much more afraid of the consequences at home than I was about the consequences in school.
Yeah.
And that, I think across the piece, again, that's quite a good thing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really happen anymore. I think there's been something has happened which is very difficult to understand about the balance between parents and school and parental attitudes towards school. And it does seem, and this does happen at the private sector, but I think probably not as much as it does in the state sector. I'm not sure that parents are as supportive of schools as they used to be.
No, I don't think they are. I think they're also, this is not all parents, it's that phrase, all generalizations are wrong. But it is a fact that over the 20 years of my headship, there was definitely an increasing number of parents that were helicopter parents, that were wrapping their kids up in cotton wool, that believed everything their kids told them. And that's really dangerous. I mean, I had a brilliant upbringing. My parents were fantastic. They were brilliant. And I remember my mum saying, I think it's really important for parents to get this one thing right. And she said, I'm going to tell you what it is. And then you think about that when you come to have your own family. And she said, when a kid asks you to do something or wants something and you say yes, do it.
Mm-hmm.
And if the child asks something and you say no, don't do it.
Yeah.
And do not change your mind.
Well, of course, that consistency is very important in schools as well.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the problem is making staff all do what they've got to do, even in these magnificent classroom situations where you're teaching a stormer and something happens and it's a child that you really like who's making a great content, you've still got to treat them the same way as all that. Now, I have to say, I was very guilty of not doing that when I hated confronting young people, and therefore for about the first 2 years, my listeners from Daniel Stewart's Melville College 1980 to 82 will remember these years with affection. But it was actually quite hard for me.
Yeah.
I mean, there was always the possibility you'd go and get someone, but generally speaking, I just suffered. And in fact, if I'd just taken a firmer disciplinary stand earlier on, that might have been better.
Yeah.
I just was thinking about one story which characterizes it. I've got a friend who's a senior member of staff in a state school, and who's great. She's a great colleague and a great teacher. But she was telling me about her despair about various of the theoretical sanctions that are in place in the school in which she teaches, and one of them was about lateness, because the kids are chronically late. If they're late, they report to the office and they are given a slip, which is a particular colour. I won't say more just in case I reveal the school. But they're given a slip which is a particular colour, and they're supposed to take that home so that their parents know they've been late. But there's no requirement for the parent to sign it or anything. They don't have to bring it back. So she said that what happens is you go in, and then in the bin outside, there's this pile of slips in this particular colour. Yeah. Now, that is like Animal Farm. You know, in Animal Farm, the pigs spend all day writing their things, standing on their hind legs, writing their things, and then in the evening all of that is burnt. Yeah. So it's just a waste of time. They might as well just say you can be late at this school. Yeah. You know, that's a problem. And it's a problem that I think is replicated all the way.
You know, I'm going to say something.
I know, I can tell. What I'm not sure what it is though, Rod.
That's just funny.
It is funny, but it's also it's funny in a kind of ludicrous sense.
In a one flew over the cuckoo's nest.
Yes, it's fun. That's right.
It's absolutely mental.
Yes, it's
mental.
It's completely. I mean, it's complete. It's complete. It doesn't make any sense at all.
It's not a sanction.
It's not. Well, it's not any kind of sanction, and it's purposeless, and it takes up a lot of time. And they might as well just say, if you're late, go to class.
And for eco warriors, what a waste of paper.
Oh, completely.
I mean, let's do
completely.
Give them the slip online.
But of course, by preference, what would be better is if they said, if you're late, you go to the office. If you're late twice, then you have to do lunchtime detention.
Yeah.
And unless your parents explain that why you were late, and of course parents will rush to explain things like that. Move on, Rod. What's the second thing on your list?
Well, I've actually just mentioned it. I think the one thing that the independent sector allows more of is autonomy. Autonomy in classrooms, autonomy in policy, autonomy in discipline. And I think if that, well, certainly, I've always argued that if an independent school wasn't doing a good job, it wouldn't be there because nobody would be willing to pay the money. So autonomy works. What I don't like is going into schools where I see, for example, and this happens in the independent sector too. So this is actually saying that autonomy isn't actually strong enough in some independent schools because you have maybe 6 primary 7s and there's the same amount of wall space for each topic because they don't want parents comparing teachers or children's experience from one class to another, which always happens. And that's also kind of, for me, bowing to that perception that parents won't like what, class teacher A is doing with her primary 7 and class teacher B is not doing quite the same with his class. And then there's all these unfortunate comparisons, blah, 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 blah. But I still think leadership in that form should take a stand and allow autonomy.
Well, of course, Curriculum for Excellence was supposed to increase teacher autonomy.
Yeah,
they were supposed to say, look, here's all your outcome, here's what you're supposed to eventually lead to. Yeah. Here is the desirable 21st century Scottish child. Do lots of things towards that end, but you can do it in whatever way you want. And that simply didn't really work very well because so many teachers said, I'm not really very sure what I'm supposed to be doing here. Interestingly, my second one, it is also about teaching, and it's about kind of practical things like teacher retention. So that part of the problem that seems to exist I get kind of anecdotal evidence of in state schools is the idea that child A's English teacher for higher English goes off sick, and very often with stress. I mean, there are enormous numbers of state school staff off with stress, and that figure will not have a comparative in independent schools. I think in my entire career, I think I dealt with one member of staff who was off with stress, but that person was not really a great teacher. I mean, that was the problem. The problem was that they shouldn't have been a teacher. But in terms of the kind of things that cause stress and cause young teachers in particular to become very stressed, I don't think these things exist to the same extent in independent schools. I think they are there, but I think the structures are different in terms of supporting them. So teacher retention, the issue of unqualified teachers teaching some of the classes.
Yeah.
So people coming in to teach things, and he's sitting watching a film because your English teacher's off for 3 weeks. The issue of split classes, something I've definitely got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about. A lot of split classes in state schools now. That can work. It can be very, very good and very successful.
Explain to listeners split classes.
A split class means that instead of Mr. Smith taking your son for maths, Mr. Smith takes him for 3 periods and Mrs. Jones takes him for 3 periods. And they may have completely different teaching methods. Now, that could be good if there's enough time for them to really get together and talk about what's happening in the class. But I think, generally speaking, what happens is the kids say, we like Mrs. Jones better than Mr. Smith.
Yeah.
They don't look forward to Mr. Smith's periods, even though from a kind of head teacher perspective, Mr. Smith may be the one that gets them through the exam.
Yeah.
Because as we know, popularity of a teacher has almost nothing to do with their efficacy as a teacher. And that's just a fact.
But isn't it interesting that your second point is about class teaching and mine was about autonomy? And actually both of those stem from the discipline issue in
completely.
We're talking about stress for teachers, the number of teachers that are stressed. Me coming into the independent sector because I had autonomy to make rules and policies that I felt were, more appropriate for an educational setting where children are valued and supported and we don't tolerate bullying or indiscipline, blah, 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 blah. So actually, both of our second actually stem from the fact that the big issue in Scottish education, as we've discussed before, is discipline. And you have a very interesting statistic on this, don't you?
I do have an interesting statistic on it about teacher assaults, and about the fact of.
And you're going to make me guess, aren't you?
I made you guess. He's playing with you, listeners. Yes, I can see what he wanted me to do. We were going to pretend that I had told him, and then he was going to get it exactly right. So that would have been very, very funny.
That's not true.
I mean, thousands and thousands of teachers there are thousands and thousands of reported assaults in Scottish schools by pupils on teachers, and these are the ones that are reported, and there's an enormous problem associated with this. Interestingly, I spoke to a doctor recently, and I said, look, what happens in A&E, because he was an A&E doctor, what happens in A&E on a Friday night if one of the nurses gets punched by a patient? And he said, oh, probably nothing. And I thought, that's really interesting, because I thought this was something that only happened in schools. And of course, in schools, you're dealing with children. And Rod and I were having a conversation before recording, as we do, because we actually also talk to each other. And the thing that we were talking about was exactly this phenomenon of the idea that increasingly the Scottish justice system won't really deal with children because, and this is essentially commendable, they don't want children to become criminalized.
Yeah.
The difficulty is if parents aren't doing it and schools aren't doing it and even the justice system isn't doing it, who is it that is limiting those children, the small minority of children who are also now in mainstream schools rather than in special schools, a lot of them. I mean, I'm not suggesting that all children who go to special schools are necessarily very badly behaved. Who is it who's actually sorting things out then for them? And what happens to them in the future?
Yes.
My worry has always been that the child that you let away with something when they are 14 finds themselves in a pub when they're 19, says something untoward to the man sitting next to them and gets a knife in their throat because they haven't really understood limitation in the past. And I think that's incredibly important. It doesn't need to come just from punishment and strictness and all that kind of thing. It also needs to come from particular targeted pastoral care. And to be fair, pastoral care teachers in the state sector are run off their feet,
Run ragged.
and they are looking sometimes a very small number of children are taking up a huge amount of their time, and that doesn't leave an awful lot of time for the nice girl who sits at the end of the back of the class, who's in a bad state, in fact, inside her. And I think, all of these things need to be dealt with, tackled, and thus reduce teacher stress. Support teachers who are having problems in the classroom, and but don't support teachers having problems in the classroom by dealing with the teacher. Do it by dealing with the classroom.
Yeah, but as you were talking there, that suddenly this realization in my head that is there a correlation with us now having the highest prison population on record in Scotland?
Oh, definitely.
With the fact that there has been a lack of discipline throughout their childhood.
And I mean, sorry if we sound like a pair of old right-wing buffdies here, but at the end of the day, same with drug deaths. I mean, same with drug deaths, same with sort of generational unemployment, same with the prison population, and same with terrible health outcomes in Scotland. And all of that stems from education, and it stems from a situation in which children are simply not being told to do enough, while at the same time, and this is also something else we should talk about, they're not actually being educated very well for high level educational curricular reasons, i.e. in curricula for excellence.
Well, no, I mean, the outcomes now in Scotland for kids generally, we've just absolutely tumbled down all the international tables. When you compare to other countries, tumbled.
And if you're not highly literate and you're not highly numerate and things like that, it's actually very difficult for you sometimes to get employed. And there's not enough going on to solve these issues. Give me a third one, Rod.
Well, this is to do probably with something that you've mentioned a lot in the past, and that's extracurricular support.
It's my third one as well. No, it is.
Yeah, I think it's a range of opportunity. And I know it from my own kid, he, age 4, he said, "Can I try violin?" I thought, God, on you go. So he does a violin for 2 years, stops, and I said, "You sure you want to stop? You want to give, because I don't like giving up. Come on, give it another go." So, give it another go, and he did it. But wasn't enjoying it, that's fine. So actually, I quite like to do the drums. So I think, oh God, from the violin to the drums, can't it get any worse? Well, we have a garage, so we'll put the drum set in there. And, drums, he had the opportunity of learning any musical instrument he wanted. He had the opportunity in arts and the creative arts and in sport and a huge variety. And what that did, I think, was allow him to find something that he was particularly good at and also really, really enjoyed. And I find a lot of kids that join us or you join an independent school from a local authority school don't actually know sometimes that they're really good at something because they've never had the opportunity to do it.
I think that's definitely true. It enables people who are going to be very good at something to shine in it. But there's also the impact of extracurricular activities just across the piece. And that impact has a number of different effects because, I mean, generally speaking, if you say even to clever, well-adjusted children in state schools or in private schools, what is it you go to school for? They'll say, well, really, I go for my friends. My friendship is the most important thing. I think it happens to people in school. And very often after that, they'll say, well, I got up this morning, I wasn't feeling very well. I hate maths, but I went because I had a rugby practice or I had a football practice or I had a hockey practice or I'm in the school play. And those become really important things. And the other effect of them is about teamwork, about doing these things together. Something like a pipe band that's absolutely fantastic extracurricular activity, I think, because it has this combination of musicianship and discipline. And you're part of a team. You're all working together to achieve something. And so it has that effect of teamwork. And it's also very often a horizontal activity. That is what I mean. Do I mean horizontal? No, it's a vertical activity, by which I mean the 60-year pupils are doing it with the second-year kids. And that therefore means that there's much less likelihood of year groups kind of getting at each other because they actually know each other quite well. I know her from the choir. That sort of thing.
And that's not to discredit local authority schools where there will be things going on, and teachers will be giving up time. There will be clubs and there will be associations and activities. But what it is for me is it's the range of clubs and opportunities.
Well, there are two things about that. The first thing is that my big thing, I was the Scottish Schools debating coach. And therefore, I mean, I was a school debater, a student debater, and debating was obviously the activity that I did when I was at school. Debating, I'm just saying this in square brackets at the side, is a great activity to do in a school because you can do it with 4 kids in an empty classroom. You don't need activity. They don't need to be big and strong or anything, these kind of things. They just need to be prepared to get on their feet and talk.
Yeah.
So debate, but when I started my career in 1980, private schools did not have a look in debating. You would get through, you might get through the Edinburgh round, which would have lots of private schools in it, but as soon as you started competing with the Glasgow schools, the Glasgow state schools, particularly the Glasgow Catholic state schools, I mean, they were brilliant debaters. They were just all over the place. 1983, the teacher strike took place. Teachers worked to rule, which meant they didn't do any extracurricular activities, and that lasted for a full school year, and it never really recovered. And I can remember this, and it was very sad, really. Although I suppose it made me happy at the time. In 1982, there were something like 230 secondary schools took part in the main debating competition in Scotland, and the following year it was 35.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased to say that Downer Stewarts and Melville College won the competition that year. Now, I mean, that was because of the absence of all of these incredibly talented people over on the other side. And I do think that extracurricular activities are incredibly important, and they're a marker of what it is that parents are buying into. In my view, teachers who offer extracurricular activities on a regular basis in state schools should be paid more, a view which I put in a one-on-one conversation with Mr. Swinney a long time ago when he was, during his ill-fated period as being in charge of education in Scotland, which I think a lot of people, including myself, had very high hopes for.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because there isn't really an argument against paying people more to do extracurricular activities. They're working extra hours to do it. It would be very difficult for the EIS to turn around and say, we don't want you to give Mr. Smith, £200 more a month because he does the football club or because he runs the film club or whatever. And I really think that would make an enormous change in state schools if that was actually possible. So extracurricular activities, discipline, autonomy, anything else?
Oh, I mean, there are lots of things.
Well, there are loads facilities.
Facilities.
We have to admit the private schools have better facilities. But again, if the state had not decreed the playing field should be sold off at such a rate, if you did buck up extracurricular activities in school and therefore have all the necessary equipment and stuff, if you raise the education budget a bit, there isn't any reason why state schools couldn't mimic private schools in those respects.
Yeah, and they're beginning to, I have to say. There are a couple of schools that are being built in West Lothian just now where the facilities are actually they're world class.
Yes.
So I think that money is going in there, and so hopefully that will come through. But I suppose facility is one aspect, but it's not really, I don't think, fundamental to a person's, what I would call core values or their character, as we were discussing with Kenny Primrose a few weeks back. So that's why it certainly wasn't going to make my top 3. It probably wouldn't really necessarily make my top 6 or 7. I think class size is potentially an issue, although in the state sector I had a class of 34 and I did a bloody good job.
Yeah, I've never been a great class sizer. It's really important. English teachers used to like smaller class sizes because one of the effects of it was English teachers do a tremendous amount of marking. If you have 8 less pupils, it's hours saved of your time. That's not really an educational reason. It's a reasonable reason, but it's not an educational.
Yeah, it's classroom management, isn't it? It's not about the outcomes or the experience.
Yeah. So I mean,
isn't it fascinating that we've talked about independent education and we are of clearly proponents of it and value it highly, and yet we've not come to the really tricky part. It's this calling of an independent school private. I think that's a big issue, calling it private, because it's not private. It is open to everyone, but the money comes into play.
Well, the money does come into play. I mean, one of the points about it is, and it'd be interesting to hear if we can find someone who's very anti-private schools to talk about this, because it does tend to be the case that the anti-private school lobby doesn't really understand that a lot of children are in private schools who are not paying the fees or not paying the full fee, and it brings you back to an issue, which is how should we fund places in any school?
Yeah.
Because there's this kind of concept that independent education is something you pay for and state education is free. Whereas in fact, of course, in Scotland, state education costs about £9,000 a year.
Yeah.
And that £9,000 a year is very directly given to schools to educate your child. It just comes out of tax income. So you're paying for your child's place.
Yeah.
I mean, most people who work are paying for their children's place in a state school. But that way of looking at it is very difficult to get across in Scotland in 2026, that everything is paid for. In fact, nothing is free. Mr. Swinney's wee school bags, which we have yet to see, will cost a certain amount of money, and they'll actually cost quite a lot of money once you've factored in everything that goes with them and all the crap that's going to go inside them, which is going to be a lot of which is never going to be used. I mean, that issue about value for money is very interesting indeed. I think that is a very good point.
Well, and if you look at those countries that have an education at the moment that you're probably relatively proud of, I'm thinking of Scandinavian countries. These countries don't necessarily have any independent schools.
That is correct. Yes, that is correct. It's a bit. There's an interesting point about this, about Finland, for example. Now, for a while, it's not so true now. But for a while, Finland was held up as having the best education system in the world. Now, that is not true, because quite a lot of what they wanted to do hasn't actually worked out in the long term. But it's still pretty good. I went to a talk at one point by the Finnish Minister of Education, who incidentally spoke perfect English, as you would expect. And one of the points he made was about independent schools or private schools. I mean, that is even truer there, because in fact, they don't have any schools where people pay fees, but they do have independent schools, which the government pays for. So you can set up, I don't know if they do church schools, for example.
Like the Jordan Hill model type.
But even more special, specialist schools and things like that, more like something like St. Mary's Music School, which is largely funded, I think I'm right in saying, by the government, and which is a specialist school, and also lots and lots and lots of what at one time we would have called special schools, where children with particular forms or needs are kept together. It's all paid for by the government. And I have to say, in a sort of slightly closing moment, that I think that it would be possible to have an education system in Scotland where most schools were like what independent schools are like now, and nobody had to pay. I think it would be possible to do that. And it would be a very interesting thing to attempt to do. I'd love to be in a situation where, for example, you said, we're going to try something. And what we're going to try is that some good headmaster or deputy headmaster of an independent schools and some of their staff are going to come into cooperation with the heads of a state school, heads and senior management team of a state school. And for a year or 2 years or 3 years, you're going to try and run that state school like it was an independent school. And a brave local authority and a brave head of an individual school saying, come ahead, we'll do that. Where would that school be in 2 or 3 years relative to where it is now? That's the question on my lips.
Well, I suppose it would be whether or not that independent school management team had the autonomy to run a local authority school in the way that they saw fit.
Well, I think I would be talking about, in an ideal world, I'd be talking about a situation when you just said, where the local authority just said, right, there's your £8,950 per child. You just get on with it. You can do anything you like. You can.
Well, I've long argued that actually the governments have looked at this all the wrong way about trying to close down independent schools, and they're evil because everybody pays for them, and it's all just the rich and wealthy and old boys network and blah, blah, blah. It's a whole lot of absolute nonsense and a whole lot of rubbish. The argument should be, well, let's make all schools independent.
Yes, that's quite an interesting point to stop at, actually, because
you've got local authority chiefs of education falling off their seats at that, because what would they do?
Well, they do nothing. And you'd save all that money.
You'd save a hell of a lot of money.
You'd get rid of Education Scotland. You'd save 13 million a year. You would actually have autonomous schools. You'd have to have a very firm inspectorate. You'd have to have a situation in which there was a group that actually could say the school's doing a good job or it's not doing a good job, and if necessary, they could shut a school down, or at least they could introduce special measures.
And there would be a level of governance as well.
Oh, definitely.
As independent schools.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, again, people from your local community, local business people with an interest in kids and their education and
some parents, not a huge number of parents, but some parents on every board, and a pupil or two on every board, directing them. Absolutely.
Teamwork.
But get rid of the hierarchy, the bubble of Scottish education, all the people who have made all these wrong decisions over the time. Just get rid of them completely. And how much extra money could you pour into schools?
Don't need them.
You know?
Don't need any of them.
To end where we begun, 400,000 for little magnetic things that you put into, you're putting your phone into. £400,000 would pay for.
That's just Edinburgh City.
That's just Edinburgh City. That would pay for 8 new support for learning teachers in Edinburgh schools. Okay, so 8 schools could have another free member of staff if you could just tell children switch their phones off.
Yeah, but you see that I'm going to just finish off on that mobile, because I think we're both of the mind that an outright ban, it just seems to me almost anti-educational, because part of the, I think, job of educators is to educate, believe it or not.
Yes.
And so, if kids make a mistake with a mobile phone, you show them the error of their ways and you put in sanctions. You don't have a blanket ban. It's like saying, oh, well, people are misusing, I don't know, too many people at the moment are speeding on our roads, and it's a very dangerous situation. And we've had 3,000 deaths in the last 24 months as a result of careless driving. People are not being responsible. We're just going to ban cars.
Yes, it is exactly like that.
Oh, that's madness.
Except people are, there's not the 3,000 people dying.
No,
but that's right, and it doesn't teach people anything.
No, it doesn't.
That's good.
And that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Is that not what it's about?
Yeah.
Don't like blanket bans.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. Well, on that note, Cameron, as ever, fabulous discussion. Love chatting with you. That's it for this episode of Two Heads Are Better Than One.
Remember to give us feedback.
Yeah, we want feedback.
We want feedback, and
come on, listener.
Email address is.
It's rodandcameron@gmail.com. And we're asking you as well, if you do like the programme, please, share the news, tell your friends. And remember, in education and in life, 2 heads really are better than 1. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.
Bye.